Today, we are plunging into a topic that's just, well, it's as ancient and universal as the human heart itself. It's our persistent quest for meaning, especially amidst suffering.
It really is fundamental, isn't it?
It is. Pastor John Kodiyil puts it so well in his work. He says, man is suffering. To deny that, we have to deny our own existence. We all want to know the reason why we are here on earth.
That really resonates.
And, in a world that's just overflowing with explanations, he calls it 1,000 reasons given and 10,000 explanations, it can feel like we're just adrift, right? Chasing answers in this huge sea of information.
Definitely feels that way sometimes.
But what if? What if there's a single unifying story, a really profound narrative that holds the key, not just to understanding why we're here, but offers a complete solution to, well, everything that's gone wrong?
That's a huge claim, but a hopeful one.
It is.
Today, we're tackling something pretty immense. It's a Christian framework called the Fivefold Plan of God. And honestly, it presents itself as more than just theology. It's framed as a kind of spiritual instruction manual.
It really is. It aims to cover everything. Cosmic history from way back in eternity past right through to eternity future.
And the source material itself, compiled by Pastor John Kodiyil, isn't just academic theorizing. It's described by him as an instruction manual to leading the ideal Christian life.
Right, and it comes from decades of his own study, his personal notes, and this really intense spiritual search he undertook. It's all condensed into this handbook that tries to map the entire biblical story onto, well, global history.
And I think what's really key for you listening is understanding the author's own journey. It wasn't a narrow path. It was quite expansive, which gives him a pretty unique perspective for putting all this together.
Absolutely. Pastor Kodiyil's story is quite the adventure. Spanned 3 continents. He started in Catholicism, then explored Hinduism, and even embraced Islam for a time.
Wow.
Yeah, before finally, in 1997, coming to a conviction in Jesus Christ. And what makes his framework, I think, particularly grounded is his strong belief in the Jewish roots of Christianity. He really emphasizes that.
And we see that emphasis physically manifested too, don't we, in his actions?
We do. He's actually invested quite a bit in preserving Judeo-Christian history. He contributed significantly to restoring the 822-year-old Kadavum synagogue in Cochin, India.
That's incredible.
It really underscores his whole theological viewpoint. Judaism is the root, the foundation, the trunk, and the Christian faith is like the branches grafted onto it. His 5-part structure even seems to mirror the 5 books of the Jewish Torah. It sets that deep foundation right from the start.
Okay, so that context is vital. This framework is attempting to place everything within a specific narrative. Before we get into the weeds, let's just lay out the main structure. What are these 5 big epochs in the fivefold plan?
Right, so the entire sweep of history, cosmic, planetary, even individual destiny, is seen through these 5 stages. It helps give context to everything within God's larger plan.
Okay.
First is the creation. This covers origins, the divine council, angels, mankind, all that beginning stuff.
Got it.
Second, the fall and subsequent judgments. This details the big rebellion, the cosmic conflict, and its immediate catastrophic effects here on earth.
Makes sense.
Third, the promise. This is where God starts setting up his covenants with humanity, kicking off the restoration process.
Like the beginnings of hope.
Exactly. Fourth is the redemption. This focuses entirely on Jesus Christ, his life, death, resurrection, the absolute centerpiece. Yeah. And finally, fifth, the restoration. This covers the end times timeline, the final judgments, and the ultimate setup of the eternal kingdom.
Okay, that's a seriously comprehensive map. Let's dive into the start then, the biblical foundations of creation and the conflict that arose, because even how this system defines man is quite specific and sets the stage for spiritual warfare later.
Yeah, you have to start with the main subject, us, humanity. Man is defined in 3 parts: spirit, soul, and body.
Spirit, soul, body.
And the physical body, it's temporary, just a vessel, a container. The source points to Hebrews 9:27, appointed to die once, then judgment.
So not about preserving this current body forever.
Not at all. The framework emphasizes the goal is transformation. We're waiting for a glorious, incorruptible body at the judgment, referencing Philippians 3:21.
So the body is just temporary housing. The spirit connects us to God, and the soul is mind, will, emotions.
Exactly. And within this framework, the primary source, the Holy Bible, plays a very specific role.
How does it define the Bible's function?
It's seen as more than just a religious text. It's viewed as a supernatural book, entirely inspired by the Holy Spirit. It acts as the ultimate authority.
The authority for what specifically?
For answering those huge existential questions everyone eventually asks. Where did I come from? Why am I actually here? Where am I going?
The big three.
Right. And even though it's made up of 66 different books written over centuries by various authors, the framework insists it has just one central unified theme.
Which is?
God's loving, organized plan to rescue mankind through Jesus Christ. That's the thread holding it all together.
And that plan essentially is framed as a kind of kingdom drama, a monarchy story.
Precisely. The source sums up the whole Bible story as the narrative of the kingdom created, then the kingdom fallen, and ultimately the kingdom restored. The constant focus is on restoring God's rightful rule and authority over earth, which Adam initially lost.
Okay, let's zoom out then, before humans even appeared. The plan introduces this idea of a divine council, which sounds important, and this is where the term Elohim comes in.
Yes, and this is a linguistic point that really broadens the scope of the whole conflict. The Hebrew word Elohim is plural. Now, most often it refers to the one true God, YHWH, Jehovah.
Right.
But the source highlights that contextually, it also refers to a whole class of sentient creatures, divine beings, who were involved in administering God's kingdom.
So not just God alone, but a sort of heavenly administration.
Exactly. It confirms this idea of a spiritual governmental structure, a whole family in heaven and earth, as Ephesians puts it, like a court, an assembly, through which God managed the affairs of his universal kingdom.
Okay, so it's a tiered system. What kinds of roles or beings are defined within the angelic hierarchy, according to this material?
Well, the sources detail specific classes. You've got the archangel, Michael, specifically named as the chief fighter, the one who contends against evil.
Okay.
Then there are the seraphim. Linguistically, the name connects to fiery serpents. They're associated with cleansing, purification,
Fiery serpents, interesting.
and then the powerful cherubim.
Ah, the cherubim. They have a very distinct description, don't they?
They do. Really vivid. Described with 4 faces: a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle.
What do those represent?
They're seen as symbolizing 4 aspects of God's nature. Man represents humanity, lion for royalty, ox for service and strength, and eagle for prophetic insight and sovereignty.
And their job initially after the fall.
Crucial role. They were stationed to guard the tree of life with a flaming sword. Why? To prevent corrupted man from eating from it and gaining immortality in that fallen, sinful state.
Right, which brings us neatly to the original rebel himself, Satan. This framework identifies him as one of these cherubim, a high-ranking one.
Yes, specifically, he's identified as Lucifer, the anointed cherub who covers, citing Ezekiel 28.12. He was created perfect, stunning in wisdom and beauty, living on God's holy mountain, until iniquity was found in him.
Lucifer. And the source digs into his name, right?
Yeah, it does. It breaks down his title from Isaiah 14, Hillel ben Shachar, literally means son of the morning, or day star, shining one.
He was basically top tier, second only to God himself. And his sin was pride.
Pure pride, a profound narcissistic desire for worship and autonomy. He wanted to be God. He declared, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God.
And he wasn't alone in this rebellion.
No, it was persuasive. He drew a third of the Elohim, these other divine beings, with him. And the framework argues this original desire to usurp God is the root of all the false religions that followed. Those fallen council members became the false gods of nations, Ashtoreth, Chemosh, Milcom, and so on.
Okay, that sets a huge cosmic stage for rebellion. Now let's bring it down to earth. Adam and Eve's first sin, the eating of the fruit scene 5 in this plan. It's treated as more than just a simple slip-up.
Oh, absolutely. It was a deliberate political and spiritual act, a declaration of total independence from God.
Independence? How so?
By eating the food, they were effectively saying, we don't need God's law, his wisdom. We'll decide what's good and evil for ourselves. It was fundamentally an act of doubt, doubting God's truthfulness, his goodness, trying to become like the Elohim on their own terms.
And the consequences weren't minor. They were immediate, catastrophic, affecting everything.
Everything. The source details 5 specific profound effects that rippled out instantly.
Okay, what are they?
1. Loss of righteousness. Their spiritual nakedness, their shame was exposed. 2. Separation from God. That close communion was broken. Isaiah 59.2 says iniquity separated us from God.
Right.
3. A cursed environment. The ground itself was cursed. Thorns, epistles work became toil. Frustration became inherent in sustaining life.
4.
4. Spiritual and physical death. This confirmed what God warned. Romans 6.23 nails it. The wages of sin is death. It entered the human experience.
And the fifth consequence.
5. The need for clothing. And this is quite visceral. God himself had to shed the first blood, killing an animal to make skin tunics for them.
Wow.
This established a fundamental principle you see running through the whole plan.
Yeah.
No covering, no remission of sin without shed blood.
That point about shed blood is crucial. And something else you mentioned earlier, the authority shift. Adam's failure wasn't just personal, it actually empowered the enemy, Satan.
This is absolutely central to the spiritual warfare aspect presented here. Adam had been given the deed to the earth, dominion over it all.
He was supposed to be the manager.
Exactly. But in his sin, he effectively handed the keys, the authority, over to Satan. This is why the New Testament legally characterizes Satan as the god of this age and the prince of the power of the air.
So we're born into a world under an illegitimate ruler.
According to this framework, yes. Everyone is born into a world legally, though illegitimately, leased to Satan. A spiritual war has been raging ever since that moment of surrender in the garden. And our role, through Christ, is to reclaim that lost authority.
Okay, the consequences of the fall were clearly massive, leading right into this next phase of terrifying judgments and conflicts, especially in that pre-flood world. This brings us directly to the Nephilim.
Right. Genesis 6. The Nephilim incursion is treated here as Satan's first major strategic counterattack after the fall. The goal? Corrupt the human genome itself.
The genome, why?
To wipe out the seed of the woman, the promised Messiah lineage before he could even be born. The source uses the term alien invasion, but quickly clarifies something important.
What's the clarification? Because alien invasion sounds very sci-fi.
Yeah, it does. But the distinction is critical. It wasn't interstellar. It was interdimensional.
Okay, explain that. What does that mean practically for you listening?
It means the invaders weren't, little green men from Mars. They were spiritual beings from another dimension specifically, the sons of God, identified as watcher angels from Job 1.6.
Watcher angels.
Yes, and Jude 1.67 says they abandoned their proper domain and their own abode. The source highlights the Greek word oikaterion, meaning habitation, suggesting these powerful angels had to somehow forsake their spiritual forms and take on a type of physical body to operate here in our dimension.
Oh, why? What were they after?
Strange flesh, human women. It was an unauthorized, unnatural union.
And this union produced the giants, the Nephilim.
Exactly. Nahil, meaning fallen ones. They were a hybrid race, part human, part angelic, a mix of terrestrial and celestial. These are the mighty men of old, men of renown, mentioned in Genesis.
And they weren't exactly benevolent rulers.
Far from it. Destructive, tyrannical, spiritually corrupt. And what's really fascinating, and maybe unique to this framework, is the direct line it draws between these biblical figures and world mythology.
How so? What's the connection?
The framework explicitly argues that myths, Greek myths about the Titans, the Olympians, or figures from Indian epics like the Pandavas, are actually distorted cultural memories of this real historical event.
So those myths have a basis in the Nephilim.
That's the assertion. These beings were so powerful and renowned that their stories got twisted and enshrined in global myths, giving them a kind of counterfeit immortality. The corruption, both genetic and spiritual, became so widespread, the source argues, that God had no choice but to cleanse the earth with the flood.
To preserve the human lineage.
Yes, specifically to protect the lineage of the seed of the woman from total contamination.
Okay, so the flood wiped out all flesh, but did it completely solve the Nephilim problem? The source mentions their spirits.
Right, this is key. The flood was effective against the flesh. The specific angels responsible for the incursion, they were immediately chained in Tartarus, a place of deep darkness, awaiting final judgment.
Okay.
But their offspring, the Nephilim, they weren't souls created by God in the normal sense. They were hybrid abominations. When their physical bodies died in the flood, their bodiless spirits, what we typically call demons, were cursed to roam the earth.
Looking for bodies.
Exactly. Longing to inhabit bodies again. And this leads to that chilling phrase in Genesis 6.4 and also afterward.
So they came back?
The source affirms they did. The Nephilim problem wasn't fully eradicated in spirit form, and giants appeared again after the flood. Think of Goliath, the sons of Anak, Og, king of Bashan, Israel, had to fight them later. The struggle continued.
Wow. Okay, so after the flood, humanity gets a reset, but almost immediately there's another major rebellion led by Nimrod at the Tower of Babel. And the goal wasn't just building something tall.
No, far more ambitious, according to this framework. Nimrod, his name literally means rebel, was the first post-flood dictator, the first tyrant trying to centralize human power against God's command to spread out and fill the earth.
So the city and tower were symbols of unified rebellion?
Yes, in Shinar. But the tower's goal, described as having its top in the heavens, wasn't just about physical height.
Okay, let's get into the language here, because the source makes a provocative claim based on the Hebrew.
It does. It looks at the phrase Rosh Shamayim, which can mean top heaven, and also a related root word, shalal, often translated to profane, but it can also mean to pierce or to bore through.
Pierced, bore through. What were they trying to pierce?
The source argues Nimrod and his followers weren't just building high, they were attempting to use occult knowledge, maybe architecture or some kind of technology, to literally pry open a portal into the eternal realm.
A portal,
Yeah.
like interdimensional travel.
Essentially, yes. A breach in the space-time continuum. They were trying to access forbidden, inaccessible secrets. The source uses the term batsar, seeking godhood on their own terms, bypassing God entirely.
That makes God's response confusing the languages seem less like just punishment and more like a critical intervention.
It was both mercy and judgment. By scattering them and confusing their language, God prevented humanity from prematurely achieving this grand, unified, satanic act of rebellion. It saved them from themselves, in a way.
And Babel itself becomes a symbol.
A powerful one, symbolizing rebellion, confusion, and it directly foreshadows the final global system of opposition against Christ, what Revelation calls Mystery Babylon. And Nimrod, he's seen as the prototype, the blueprint for the future Antichrist, who is sometimes prophetically called the Assyrian.
Okay, these judgments are intense. Before we get to the covenants and the solution, there's Sodom and Gomorrah, often reduced to just sexual sin, but the source, citing Ezekiel, paints a broader picture.
Yes, it's important to look beyond the immediate outcry about the sexual immorality and pursuit of strange flesh, though that was certainly part of it. The source really emphasizes the lesson from the prophet Ezekiel.
What did Ezekiel highlight?
He pointed to social iniquity as the root cause. Specifically, 3 things characterize Sodom's sin: pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness.
Pride, plenty of food, and too much free time.
Exactly. They had a comfortable, prosperous life, no major external threats, no economic hardship. But in their comfort, they completely forgot God. They used their wealth and leisure time purely for pleasure seeking.
And that led to...
It led them, as the source puts it, to become satanic rather than divine. The critique here is pretty sharp. Idleness and prosperity, when they're divorced from godly purpose, become a curse. It leads directly to neglecting the poor and needy, which was also part of Ezekiel's indictment against them.
That critique of prosperity leading to spiritual decay feels like a perfect lead-in to Satan's next alleged strategy. After the flood limited direct demonic rule, he needed a subtler approach: the new deceptive cover.
Precisely. This is where the framework offers a really unique take on history and cosmology. Since direct physical intervention like Genesis 6 was largely curtailed by God putting up spiritual barriers, Satan had to shift tactics.
From direct assaults to
orchestrating rule indirectly. Through systems, occult, priesthoods, sorcerers, and maybe most effectively over the long term, secret societies.
So the goal changed from corrupting genes to controlling ideas.
Exactly. He needed to rewrite the script of human history and understanding, repackage himself and his agenda, create a new narrative, maybe with a quasi-Christian veneer that educated modern people would find palatable.
And this is where the argument comes in that ancient occult ideas were basically rebranded as modern science. We need to unpack that claim.
Yeah, the source makes a strong case here. It argues the key foundations of modern thought, specifically things like Copernican heliocentrism, the idea of a vast, almost infinite universe, maybe even concepts underpinning modern chemistry and physics, actually have roots in ancient Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Hermeticism, alchemy.
These ancient mystical or occult systems.
Yes. Systems that often prioritize secret knowledge and tend to remove God from the immediate picture. The argument is that these ideas were systematically repackaged over centuries and presented as objective scientific discovery.
Why would that repackaging be necessary for Satan's long-term plan, according to this view?
2 main reasons are suggested. First, making the universe seem incomprehensibly vast and impersonal makes the creator God feel distant, abstract, maybe irrelevant to your daily life.
Takes God out of the equation.
Right. And second, it subtly opens the door for the idea of alien saviors.
Ah, okay. The return of the fallen ones, but in disguise.
Exactly. If life just spontaneously evolved across this immense cosmos and we're not unique, then those spiritual beings who were exiled, the fallen angels, could potentially reemerge. not as demons or mythical giants this time, but maybe as advanced, perhaps even benevolent extraterrestrials.
A modern costume for an ancient deception.
That's the idea. And the source suggests this is highly relevant today, pointing to increasing discussions and even government acknowledgments about UFOs or UAPs. It stresses the need for extreme spiritual discernment against potential cosmic deception.
Okay, that gives us an incredibly detailed and frankly intense look at the creation and conflict stages. Let's pivot now sharply towards the solution. The situation clearly required intervention. This moves us into parts 3 and 4 of the fivefold plan, the promise and the redemption.
Right. Even immediately after the fall, God offered a glimmer of hope in Genesis 3.15, the prophecy that the seed of the woman would eventually crush Satan's head. The whole story from that point forward, especially the history of Israel, revolves around God's covenants.
Covenants. The source mentions the Hebrew word berith.
Yes, berith. It literally means to cut. This references the ancient practice of cutting animals in half when making a solemn agreement or treaty. The parties would walk between the pieces. It signified the life and death seriousness of the pact.
And the major biblical covenants, Noah, Abraham, Moses, they lay the groundwork for restoration. But we need to grasp why the Old Covenant, the law given to Moses, wasn't enough.
Good question. The covenant made with Israel at Mount Sinai was fundamentally a covenant of law. It was based on performance, on self-righteousness, demanding perfect obedience to the Ten Commandments and all the associated statutes.
Which humans couldn't achieve.
Exactly. The source uses a powerful analogy: marriage. God entered into a covenant marriage with Israel, but Israel repeatedly broke that covenant through idolatry and disobedience. Prophetically, Jeremiah even speaks of God giving Israel a certificate of divorce. The law ultimately didn't save anyone. It only served to perfectly reveal humanity's powerlessness and deep-seated sinfulness.
So the law acted like a mirror showing the dirt, but it wasn't the soap that could wash it away.
That's a great way to put it, which is why the prophets began speaking about a new covenant.
What was revolutionary about this new covenant?
It was completely different. Prophesied to be written not on stone tablets, but miraculously on the human heart, based entirely on God's forgiveness and mercy, not on human works or effort. And crucially, this new covenant is established through Jesus Christ at Mount Calvary, not at Mount Sinai. It's all about grace and the Holy Spirit's work, a sharp contrast to the old system of trying to earn righteousness.
Which brings us squarely to Jesus. He's the absolute centerpiece of this entire plan. What's his specific mission according to this framework?
Jesus is the focal point of all history, all time. His core task, to bring this rebellious planet back into alignment, back into conformity with God's will. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 that Christ must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet.
So he's the mediator, the restorer.
Yes, he's the mediator. He's the last Adam, the one who succeeds where the first Adam failed, reclaiming the lost authority. He's also the ultimate King David, destined to rule the world in peace and righteousness. His mission was essentially to redeem the authority Adam forfeited in the garden.
Let's talk about the cross. What exactly did the cross accomplish within this theological structure? It seems to address all those consequences of the fall we discussed earlier.
It does. The framework highlights 4 essential achievements of the cross.
Okay, what are they?
1. It revealed God's power, his power over sin, death, and Satan. 2. It demonstrated his profound love, Romans 5.8, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, even when we were enemies.
Powerful.
3. It removed our sorrows and infirmities. Isaiah 53 says he carried our griefs and sorrows. And 4, maybe most crucially, Jesus took the punishment for our sins. Isaiah 53 again, pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities.
So the shedding of his blood was essential.
Absolutely necessary. The source constantly refers back to Leviticus 17.11. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and it's the blood that makes atonement. His blood paid the death penalty required by the broken law, Romans 6.23. It provides purity of heart and makes eternal life possible.
So he acts as the go-between, satisfying justice so God could offer mercy.
Perfectly put. He is the only mediator between God and men, as 1 Timothy 2.5 states. Sin created this massive legal chasm between a perfectly holy God and fallen humanity. We couldn't bridge it.
We needed a lawyer, basically.
Yes. The source uses that analogy. Jesus acts as our defense attorney. But he does more than argue our case. He actually paid the penalty himself. Through his death and resurrection, believers aren't just forgiven, they are legally declared righteous, clothed in his righteousness. Our standing before God changes instantly and completely.
Now, this plan is clearly meant to be universal, but the initial covenants were primarily with Israel. How does the framework explain the inclusion of non-Jewish believers, which is, the vast majority of the church today?
And that's explained through a really beautiful metaphor, the grafting. It comes directly from Paul's analogy of the olive tree in Romans 11.
The olive tree. How does that work?
Paul describes Israel as the cultivated natural olive tree. Gentiles, non-Jews, are pictured as branches from a wild, unproductive olive tree. Because many in Israel, due to unbelief, rejected Christ, some natural branches were, in a sense, broken off or temporarily pruned.
Okay.
This created an opportunity for us, the wild branches, Gentiles, to be grafted into the cultivated tree. We then get to share in the life-giving nourishment flowing up from the root being the faith of Abraham and the promises God made to him.
So this grafting didn't replace Israel, but expanded the family.
Exactly. The source strongly emphasizes this created something new. The new man, as Ephesians 2.15 calls it. One new people from the two groups. It brought those who were once far off, without God, without covenants, without hope, near to God through Christ's blood. It made them full members of God's household, citizens of his kingdom, alongside believing Jews.
That brings us logically to the final act, part 5, restoration and individual destiny. This section seems to focus on the end times timeline and how this grand cosmic plan applies personally to you, the listener.
Right. The eschatology, the study of end times, starts with a really important distinction. You have to clearly separate two different future events: the Antichrist's Great Tribulation and the Day of the Lord.
What's the core difference?
The Great Tribulation is primarily seen as the persecution of the church and Israel, largely driven by man, empowered by Satan, against man. The Day of the Lord, however, is distinctively God's direct wrath being poured out upon the ungodly world system.
So, persecution versus divine judgment. And where does the church fit in? When does the rapture happen relative to these two?
According to this framework, which holds a pre-wrath rapture view, the rapture of the harpazo, which means to snatch out or catch up, happens after the Great Tribulation begins, possibly when it's cut short, but specifically before the day of the Lord's wrath starts.
So, believers experience tribulation but are removed before God's wrath.
That's the position. The event is described vividly in 1 Thessalonians 4. Christ descends from heaven, the dead believers rise first, then living believers are caught up together with them to meet the Lord in the air. The rationale is clear. The church is not appointed to suffer God's wrath.
Okay. And the second coming, it's not just one single flashbang event.
Well,
the source uses the term parousia.
Yes, and understanding parousia is helpful. It doesn't just mean a momentary arrival. It implies an arrival and a continuing presence. It was often used for the official visit of a king or emperor.
Like a royal procession, almost.
Kind of. Just as Jesus' first coming involved his birth, ministry, death, resurrection, the whole sequence, his second coming, parousia, is seen as a complex, multi-stage process. It encompasses the rapture, the subsequent judgments on earth, the restoration of Israel, and the establishment of his physical reign on earth. It's the progressive manifestation of his kingship returning to earth.
Okay. After the rapture and leading up to the final eternal state, the sources talk about several distinct judgments. It seems important to keep them separate. Can you list them?
Yes, the framework insists that confusing these judgments causes major theological errors. There are 5 key ones.
5. Okay.
First, the believer's past sins. These were judged and fully paid for on the cross. Finished. Done deal.
Right.
Second, self-judgment or discipline. This is the ongoing correction and discipline God gives his children during this life, as Hebrews 12 talks about. It's corrective, not punitive, for salvation.
Okay. Number 3.
Third, the judgment seat of Christ, often called the Bema seat. This is only for believers. It's crucial to understand. This is not about determining salvation that's a free gift through faith. This judgment is about evaluating a believer's works and faithfulness after salvation to determine eternal rewards or loss of rewards. Think gold, silver, precious stones versus wood, hay, stubble.
So rewards based on service, not salvation based on works.
Exactly. Fourth, the judgment of nations. This happens when Christ physically returns to earth. He gathers the nations and separates people based on how they treated him, often reflected in how they treated his followers, the sheep from the goats, as Matthew 25 describes it.
And the final one.
Fifth, the great white throne judgment. This is the final judgment, reserved exclusively for the wicked dead, all those throughout history whose names are not found written in the Lamb's Book of Life. They are judged based on their deeds recorded in heavenly books, and the outcome is consignment to the lake of fire.
That's a sobering sequence, and the ultimate culmination of this entire 5-fold plan is the renewal of everything, the eternal kingdom.
Yes, the final phase involves the millennial reign of Christ, a literal 1,000-year period where Jesus, as the victorious last Adam, reigns directly over the earth from Jerusalem. This fulfills the original dominion mandate given to Adam.
1,000 years of peace.
That's the picture.
Yeah.
After that 1,000-year intermediate kingdom, Christ delivers the perfected kingdom up to God the Father. This leads into the eternal state, the new heavens and new earth, where, as 1 Corinthians 15 says, God will finally be all in all. Total restoration.
Okay, that's the grand cosmic sweep. Now let's bring it right down to the individual. How does this massive plan define your personal destiny, your path?
This is where we get into the walk of life. It's often summarized by those 5 interconnected steps Paul lays out in Romans 8:29-30. Foreknew, predestined, called justified, glorified.
Foreknew, predestined, called, justified, glorified. Let's break those down. Start with foreknew and predestined. These can be tricky concepts.
They can be. Foreknowledge, in this context, means God existing outside of time, knew your existence, your potential, the purpose he had in mind for you before time began, as 2 Timothy 1:9 puts it.
So he knew us beforehand.
Yes, and based on that intimate foreknowledge, God made decisions in his divine counsel about your specific destiny, your role in his kingdom plan. That's predestination. The source points to Psalm 139.6, where David says God saw his unformed substance, and in his book, all the days ordained for him were written before one of them came to be.
So our life story is written in a book in heaven.
That's the imagery used. God has a specific kingdom impact, a destiny planned and recorded for each believer.
But, and this is crucial, the source is very clear, this doesn't eliminate free will, right?
Absolutely not. That's the critical balance. The plan written in heaven is the target, the potential. The spiritual battle you fight every day is about manifesting what's written in that heavenly book here on earth. Our choices matter immensely.
So that's where called comes in.
Exactly. We are called towards that purpose. Why? Because the fall disconnected us from our original destiny. God has to actively draw us back. John 6:44 says, no one can come to Jesus unless the Father draws him. He leverages that innate longing for purpose he planted in us because of his foreknowledge.
And when we respond to that call, we become justified. What does that mean legally in this framework?
Justification is the pivotal legal act. Through faith in Christ's sacrifice, God declares us righteous. It's an instantaneous change in our legal standing before him. We go from condemned to accepted.
And what happens spiritually at that moment?
The moment you're justified, your spiritual eyes begin to open. You start getting glimpses, intuitions, nudges about what you were really created for. You begin the process of discovering what's written in those heavenly books about your specific predestined plan. Then comes the lifelong process of renewing your mind with God's word, conforming your life to the image of Jesus.
Okay, which leads finally to the last step, glorified. What does that represent?
Glorification in this context isn't just about heaven someday. It's about fully stepping into and fulfilling that predestined plan while here on earth. It's the convergence point.
Convergence point.
Yeah, the moment where everything in your life, the good, the bad, the skills learned, the suffering endured, the relationships formed, all works together perfectly to propel you into your ultimate kingdom purpose. The source uses Joseph from Genesis as the prime example.
Joseph's life seems like a textbook case of convergence.
It really does. Think about his journey. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned, then suddenly promoted to be Pharaoh's second in command.
It looks chaotic from the outside.
Totally. But it wasn't random. Slavery likely purified his character, taught him humility. Prison taught him administration, patience, maybe interpreting dreams. Then promotion put him in the exact position God destined him for. To preserve life during a famine, saving not only Egypt but also his own family, the lineage of the promise. All those disparate experiences converged perfectly at the right moment for his ultimate purpose. That convergence is glorification lived out on earth.
Wow. The incredible depth of this plan is really matched only by the kind of transformative personal experience it aims for, which I think brings us full circle back to the author, Pastor Kodiyil, and his own story.
Yes, his testimony really encapsulates the whole framework, because his long intellectual struggle finally gave way to a personal encounter with the Redeemer, Jesus.
He spent years searching, right, even studying Islam intellectually, because at one point the Quran seemed more logical to him than the version of Christianity he'd seen.
That's right. He was deep in study, deep in intellectual arguments. His war was primarily intellectual. But it all came to a head in 1997. He was feeling desolate, frustrated.
And he ended up at a Christian retreat, but not exactly with an open heart initially.
No, he apparently went intending to debate. Armed with his intellectual critiques of the Bible as just a historical document, questioning translations, theological points, He was focused entirely on the book.
But something shifted.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
During one of the meetings, his sister quoted a verse, 2 Corinthians 5:2 and 1. For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him.
And that verse hit him differently.
He describes it vividly, said the words, hit me like thunder.
What happened in that moment? What did he grasp?
He said his heart just melted. He suddenly grasped the reality of what Christ actually went through, not just the physical pain, but the spiritual weight, the separation from God, the agony caused by his own unbelief and sin. All his intellectual arguments against the book just dissolved when he was confronted by the overwhelming love and reality, the person, Jesus Christ.
Wow.
He realized the God he'd been trying so hard to reach through intellect had already reached down to him, had paid the ultimate price for him personally.
That's a powerful culmination. The entire cosmic 5-part plan, from creation through redemption, all converging in that one deeply personal moment of encounter.
Exactly. And it highlights the ultimate purpose of understanding this plan. It's not just about knowing the timeline or the theology. It's about living out your own predestined purpose, connecting with the Redeemer. The bottom line question for every person according to this framework remains. Is your name written in the Lamb's Book of Life? Is that convergence point achievable for you?
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's circle back to the adversary strategy. We talk about how Satan, according to this source, initially tried to corrupt the human genome back in Genesis 6, leading to the Nephilim and necessitating the flood.
Right, the attempt to wipe out the physical seed of the woman.
And the source suggests Old Testament patterns often foreshadow future events. If that holds true, and Satan's tactics evolve from the physical to the more spiritual or ideological,
then perhaps he no longer needs to corrupt the physical genome to derail God's plan for individuals or humanity.
Which leads us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If the battles of the last days echo the past, but the focus shifts from the genome to the heart, corrupting it through sin, worldliness, the friendship with the world, James 4.4 warns against what might that look like today.
What modern technological or cultural phenomenon most closely mirrors a subtle spiritual corruption? Something that leverages those core sins. Ezekiel identified in Sodom pride, fullness of food, or maybe relentless consumerism, and abundance of idleness, perhaps endless distraction, specifically to draw your heart away from discovering and fulfilling your God-given predestined purpose.
If the enemy's endgame involves a global system offering a counterfeit salvation through human means, maybe technological, maybe political, maybe ideological, where should we be looking? Where does modern life most encourage self-sufficiency that borders on pride and emotional detachment from the Creator, hindering that connection needed for convergence?
It really brings it back to the battle for the heart and mind, being aware, being discerning. That seems to be the necessary preparation for understanding the times and for the eventual parousia.
A profound challenge indeed, something to definitely ponder as you continue your own deep dive into purpose and destiny. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.